we really wanted to be able to give small businesses the tools to be able to like shoot decent video and help educate them on how to do that so that their videos are like good.
On today's episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat, we talked to Steven from Burkhart Creative Agency. Talk about how he took his creative shop from a side hustle to a full-time gig. Let's dive right in. Steven, thank you so much for joining on another episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat. This has been in the works for almost 2 years? Wow. 2 years? Yeah. Yeah. Glad that we can finally make it happen, especially during a time when there's a bunch of craziness going on and not as many people connecting. Especially in person. So appreciate you coming down.
Oh yeah, I'm super glad to do it. It's definitely been a challenge, I'm sure, as you've had with your business, where it's like you're always like starting that conversation of like where you guys sit with like meeting. Like, do you want to do Zooms? Do you want to meet in person? And it's like some people are like really shy about it. Other people are just like, let's go for it. So it's definitely been an interesting transition and like kind of having almost that like PR aspect to like getting the business kicked off. Yeah.
And one thing that's been fun to watch is, you kind of watch you take the leap of faith and then have been building a team and all that. And before we kind of dive into there, would love to just learn more about you. Before this, you mentioned you did wedding videography, but what's kind of your story? Where'd you come from? How'd you get into where you're at now?
Absolutely. So I'd say, if I got to pick some sort of starting point, I did live sound for my church actually for a number of years and just realized that like I really enjoyed anything that was like really mixing like creative and technical things together. And so that made me start to check out photography and then ended up deciding to go into video because there was like so many wedding photographers. And so that was like a real challenge to be like, well, how would I differentiate myself? Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going down the video route.
And when was that? And when was that?
Shoot, that was probably like 2015 or something. Okay. And so that had like marginal success, nothing crazy. And the more that I was in the video world, the more I saw, and especially as, during that whole time was the transition of like Instagram really picking up speed, like all these visual platforms where businesses were trying to go on like a social platform and market to people. And they had to have visual assets to do that. You know what I mean? Like Instagram was like either you had a picture or you didn't. You know what I mean? Like if you didn't post. You couldn't. And it wasn't like Facebook or Twitter where you could just type something in. And so to be able to actually have like content to market with, I saw growing and only growing more. And so I was like, I'd really like to transition, help small businesses like achieve their goals. Cause like for me, and I'm sure for you, it's like you always had this like dream inside of you that you wanted to make happen. You know what I mean? So I had this goal that, I wanted to be able to create a life for myself where I was like in charge of like a group of people and like doing cool work. And at the same time, I was looking at these small business owners that I'm trying to help have the same thing. They have that same passion where they want to do something really, really cool with their life and have something to show for themselves. And I can be part of the process to help them do that. And that was really exciting to me. And so that's kind of where I decided to jump into doing more business related, which was fairly recent, to be honest. Gotcha. And so far it's been really fun.
Yeah. And when did you start going more down the business route, and what was it like to transition not only from photography to video, but then wedding video over to doing commercials and content for businesses?
The jump from photo to video was a challenge, to say the least. It was not only, just like cost wise, there's so much gear you got to get to do a good job with video. But on top of that, like I was doing it for weddings. And so that was really, that was a test because like you can't mess it up, but I'm also learning something for the first time. And I'm like one of those bullheaded guys where like, usually like the smart thing to do would have been to be mentored and like taught and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, like I'm diving in head first. And that's kind of always how I've been. Like I'll go for it, even if I probably shouldn't. And so that's just kind of how I pursued it. And so that was a real tough transition. So there was like some mistakes that happened along the way and eventually got that cleared up. Thankfully that's far behind me now. But that was definitely a big transition. That was tough. And then the transition really moving to business videos was really at the end of last year where I really made the conscious choice to be like, I'm going to do small businesses now and really move in that direction, which is in some ways just as intense as weddings, but just in different ways. You know what I mean? Yeah. You don't necessarily have like a moment itself that can like pass you by, like a first kiss or like a first dance, but obviously you have to be respectful of people's times and like, like do a really, really good job, make sure the takes are really good and stuff like that. So there's a different kind of pressure, but just as much, I think.
And how much do like analytics and what's the return on investment look like? I mean, do those types of questions come into play? And is that where there's maybe different pressure rather than making sure you capture that first kiss? Or
right, we've definitely started more heavy on the video production side. So analytics and like SEO and stuff like that is something we're slowly moving into, because we really just wanted to provide like a complete experience for the customers where like we could take what we made them and put it to good use. So that way they don't feel like, they spent all this money and like now they can't make it back. So, but we really have started more like heavy on the video production side. And so that's kind of where we started, and we're moving in that direction.
And so at what point, I mean, were you working part-time or full-time while, and at the time, was it called Burkhart Creative Agency, or kind of what was the transition going from like turning this into a full-time thing?
Yeah. So it's been, first, like my wedding was like Nomad Productions, then it was Nomad Wedding. And then when I decided to switch, it was Burkhart Creative Agency. It's kind of always existed on its own, but not necessarily given my full attention like it is now.
So, I mean, when did that transition happen? I mean, were you working part-time?
So I was working full-time and then basically doing like wedding work or video work whenever I could on the side, which is always a challenge. And it's always like really frustrating. You always feel like you're hitting a ceiling where it's like you're really starting to decide, sacrificing time with family or friends and stuff like that. And so it's really easy to make the job the enemy, you know what I mean, of why you can't succeed. And so I eventually got to a spot where I had enough wedding work where I really needed to go part-time to be able to spend the time like editing, because that's really what that's like the lengthy part of any video production is the post-production. And so I ended up going part-time. And then my work just got like in a weird time where they didn't have a bunch of business coming in, and I was like the only part-time guy. So I got let go. And so that was kind of like forcing me into producing my dream full-time. And so it was interesting transition for sure. It was definitely scary. And at that point, I no longer had any excuses as to like how I spent my time, or, you know what I mean? Because at that point, I didn't have like a job that I could make the enemy of why I wasn't spending my time how I wanted to. Like I had no excuse. So that was like kind of cool and exciting and yet scary, because it was all on me.
And how did you approach that? I mean, very similar story to how I got started. I mean, literally got laid off, and it was just like, all right, well, it's been in my mind. I want to do it, but now it's like, well, I got no other choice. So, I mean, how did you approach that? How did you navigate that? How did you figure out the things you needed to do to start bringing an income in?
Well, I mean, we're still figuring a lot of that out, you know what I mean? And, but, during the time that I was part-time and full-time, I've always been a really big reader. And so I've always spent a lot of time like reading like business books about like mindset, about like practical stuff like executing, communicating, reading blogs and forums of people of like how they set their business up. And so I had, done as best I can to educate myself walking into it. And obviously there's a big difference between conceptually knowing something and actually like executing on it. And that was really where all that I learned started coming into play, and then just trying to actually walk out what it meant to build a business.
I mean, it's finding that healthy balance. I mean, you can read as much. I mean, you mentioned you listen to Gary Vee. He talks about it all the time. You can read about doing push-ups all the time, but at the end of the day, reading isn't going to get you stronger. And so it's finding that balance of how do you keep educating, that continuing education, and then how does that translate into your day-to-day business decisions and how you're going to try and grow. So, I mean, you did this just recently. I mean, turn this into a full-time thing. It looks like you have a team of, 3 others.
Yes.
So how have you gone from, just starting this less than 12 months ago to having a team? I mean, what was that process like? How did you make that happen?
Honestly, it kind of happened a little bit by accident. And so I just, it's just weird. Like, sometimes you try things for a long time and they just don't work out for whatever reason. Right. And so for like weddings, I had done that for a long time, and I just always felt like I was kind of hitting a wall with it, and I didn't know what that wall was, and I didn't know why it was there or what to do to fix it. And then the moment I switched to doing the agency, like everything just started changing. So like, I had people reach out to me that wanted to help out and wanted to build the business, and other people who were recommended to me to help out. And so like literally like one person, Rylan, who's on my team that does all our editing, she had been someone who kind of like started a little bit before I made that official transition. But the other two are ones that like literally reached out and just wanted to help build the business. And so that was really exciting to feel like there's a little bit of a dream there and a goal for the future that people could kind of like get their hands around, if that makes sense. And feel like they're a part of something. And so that was really interesting. It really just like happened. Like I can't even explain it. It just like did. And so that's been really fun to see. And like, it's just weird. You know what I mean? Like, it's like one of those things you can't quantify exactly like why it happened that way, but it did. And that was really fun.
It's funny. No, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, it's kind of, when I was working at ASU full time, had literally someone working here full time before I made the jump. And it's funny, just listening, very, very similar stories. I mean, building a team from zero to where you're at now, I mean, it's tough. I mean, one, to run the business, to sell, to then everyone needs something to do. So, I mean, what's been the biggest struggle trying to figure out how, one, to grow the business while also keeping the team together, aligned, and running towards, the same end zone? Yeah,
that's definitely been a challenge. One of which I've read more books on. And so but really though, John Maxwell is like a great person to read if you want to like learn about like leadership and all those things. And leadership, well, let me back up. I would just say that something even that you mentioned in your past with working at agency is like communication is just like such a big deal. And like, I remember back in the day when I was like first looking for jobs and they were always talking about like get a bachelor's in communication. I thought that was like, what does that have to do with anything? And then you actually get into a spot where you're like working at an agency level where like people are actually trying to get like real work done. And all of a sudden communication becomes like a really big deal. And so I knew communication was going to be something that really was like key in making this work for us. And so just being like really intentional, like even when we have like our meetings, like I spend quite a bit of time like preparing for them and like understanding like, okay, like what am I saying in this meeting to like give a viewpoint of where we're headed. And so like one of the quotes that I'm like trying to kind of live my like teamwork lifestyle by, which I'm sure to butcher, is if you want people to build a boat, don't teach them how to build a boat. Give them a longing for the open sea.
That's really good.
Yeah. And so it's just the idea that like, if you can give people a tangible vision to head towards, that empowers people and motivates people to like find a way themselves. Not that they're on their own, you know what I mean? But like that's how you like innovate. That's how you like problem solve, is having people on your team that are like trying to make it work too. So
it's the opposite of micromanaging, and that's no one likes to be micromanaged, and then it's just not fun to micromanage. I mean, it takes so much more time rather than, hey, we're all adults, we all have the same goal, we know what the objective is, and kind of have the touch bases in those meetings to make sure things are progressing correctly. But I think there's a lot of businesses that prevent growth because you have someone at the top that needs to tell everyone exactly what to do, lay it all out. Right. You need to do this first and then do that. And there's no freedom to essentially make mistakes on your own and be like, oh, well, that didn't work. Maybe we could do it like this. And you're essentially creating a solutions built team by going down that route on letting people have the freedom and having, at the end of the day, just more freedom in general to think through things.
Well, that's really been tough too. And I'm pretty hands off, I would say, for the most part. I don't know if everyone else feels that way on my team, but what I've actually found is that, and one of the things I actually got from Gary Vee is to just treat each person kind of uniquely, I guess. And so like some people really need structure and other people really don't like structure. And so being able to like have enough hands off where the people can like be able to be creative and develop things on their own is really great. But at the same time, I found myself almost erring on the side of like too, willy-nilly, I guess you could say, where like maybe someone didn't have as clear an idea of like when something was due or when something should be delivered or what needed to be delivered. Yeah. And so me giving them like room to move around was actually more harmful than helpful, where they needed a little bit more structure to actually feel like they understood what was going on. And so just really finding that balance has been a real challenge for me, where it's like, I want to be not a micromanager, but I also want to provide enough structure that the people who need it feel like secure and like the expectations are understood.
I mean, how do you go about trying to find that? I mean, do you have a process now to kind of, are there certain questions that you ask to help identify those personalities on how you can communicate, or is it just more trial and error?
Yeah, it's a little bit trial and error. some of the people on my team I've known for a while, and some of the people I haven't. And I think you're always kind of adjusting, like, you know, when someone comes on a team, especially if you didn't know them for like a long time ahead of time, you know, some people could talk a pretty good game, and you want to find out like if that game is real or not. You know what I mean? And you only find that out by finding out kind of like the hard way. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you give them this task, and then if they totally destroy it, then you're like, okay, well, then you're not quite where I thought you were. Or maybe they surprise you and they do a really good job, and it's like, okay, like you talk some smack and you delivered, so we're good. You know what I mean? But really, it's just sitting down with people, I think, and individually just like talking through like what their needs are, what they like, what they don't like, and just being observational. Like, I think as a leader, you just need to be really observational and just like watch people and see, like, you know, people are not really great at hiding their feelings, not, you know, for the most part. And so like seeing like, when do they look frustrated? Like, when do they look excited? Like, what things do I say that gets them like super jazzed about our future, and what things kind of like take them down? And it's kind of just like building that like kind of like memory bank, I guess, for each person. So that way you can kind of get an idea.
Situational awareness. I mean, having EQ, I mean, it goes a long way. I mean, going back to the communication side, I love this because I agree with you. I think there's nothing more powerful than being a good communicator. And I think that's why I love marketing so much, is that's all it is you're setting up audiences and you're having a conversation, and the creative is that conversation and what you're trying to communicate. I think one of the hardest things for, you know, when it comes to new videos is kind of, what are we going to communicate? I mean, how big is communication whenever it comes into producing, you know, videos for clients? I mean, how deep do you go into, well, who are we targeting? What pain point? I mean, how does communication play into the overall video creation process?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the client. I mean, I can't, you know, for the most part, I can only work with what I'm given. You know what I mean? And so if they don't know who their ideal customer is, that doesn't really help me out a whole lot. If they're not intimately aware of their pain points and their strengths and weaknesses and what makes them different, that's still another challenge that I have to work through outside of just like storyboarding a cool video for them. Because now we're starting to like really think through things that maybe I shouldn't have to think through, or maybe they should be aware of. And it just depends on where they are in their journey as a business owner. If they're just starting out, there's no way that they like fully understand all their values as a company. Those things are kind of like discovered over time, I feel. And so we try, I'm pretty like abstract in the way I think of things. So I like to be able to hear like the whole story of what people, you know, have done, what they think about, what they feel about, and then start to try to like build pictures in my head as far as like what that video is going to look like, so that we can start discussing those things and being able to have those questions. I definitely like to go through like, hey, like, what are you guys really good at? What are you guys different at? And be able to like start asking those questions of the client so they can even get a chance to think about that, because all that's going to come out too on the script is like when they start like talking about what they're good at, you know what I mean? And it's sometimes it's hard for people, you know what I mean? Like I always say that like your whole life you grew up in school trying to like fit in, and being a small business person is like the first time that like you want to stick out like a sore thumb so people see you, you know what I mean? So sometimes it's hard for people when they're coming up with scripts and videos to like kind of brag on themselves a little bit, because it's just not natural. You know, it's not how you're really trained to be unless you're like really that like personality type. No,
and I agree. It's amazing. I mean, whenever you do bring up like those sorts of questions, like, yeah, we want a video, we want it to look really cool. Well, who are you trying to reach? What pain point are you trying to speak to? And what's the solution that we're going to use to solve that pain point to really sell your product or service? It's amazing how many businesses haven't thought through that at all. So, I mean, do you help work through that as well? Or
yeah, we try to as best we can. We want to be able to, and, you know, sometimes you can just tell that, like, if you go on someone's website, or, you know, you can start to pick out from, you know, because you're a little more objective, because, you know, you're not in the business like they are. So sometimes having that like third person to be able to look inside the business and be like, okay, I kind of see you guys really hit on these things a lot. Like, is this something that you feel really defines you guys? And they'd be like, oh yeah, like it really does. You know what I mean? So be able to help walk them through that a little bit, I think is super helpful, because, you know, some of those pain points you talked about, some of those things are like very subtle things in a video. You know what I mean? Like if you think about like a car commercial, and you see like a handsome guy driving really fast at night in his like Lexus or something like that. Like they don't say in the video, like, drive this car and you'll feel powerful and sexy. You know what I mean? It's subliminally done through like the way that they shoot it, and like the expressions on the guy's face is all very like subtle. And so sometimes those pain points are important to know, because they can you can help slip those into the subtle messages of the video, which I think is part of what makes video interesting and exciting. You know what I mean? So those subtleties. And I actually think that's what makes a good video production company is of them being, how do they say things inadvertently? You know what I mean?
How can you communicate by being creative? And that's, so I think it's called creative. Do you do it through the script? Do you do it through a visual? Do you do it through the entire story of the video? I mean, that's where, I mean, creatives can flex their creative skill. And that's where, I mean, the ones that are really good think through all that. I mean, most people tend to fall on the script. Like, are you this? Are you struggling with that in the script? And it's like, there's so many different ways that you can visually show it. You can tell it through the entire story without opening up with that direct pain point. I think
totally. Well, and I think a lot of people are insecure about those pain points. And so to say them overtly is like actually really uncomfortable and not really good. True. And so, you know what I mean? Like what if, you never see like a weight loss commercial be like, are you feeling fat and ugly every time you go on a date? You know what I mean? Like no one says that, but they'll show people who are like in shape feeling very confident. So that's like the subliminal part where they're saying like, oh, like I don't feel like that, so I want to kind of look like this, right? So they don't overtly say the pain point, but because like you know what it is and they know what it is, but we're not talking about it. And so I think that's part of it too, is like understanding those pain points, so that way you can talk about them and handle them in a way that like people actually accept. Is like really one of those other things about video production that's like really hard to kind of like get your hands around sometimes.
You guys are definitely communicating a lot. It's the stuff that you're posting, love it. I mean, where you guys are at the table with the team, doing the post shoot kind of analysis, like what's everyone thinking. On your website, I mean, you have stuff giving tips on how to think through different content ideas. I mean, that's usually the biggest struggle whenever it's like, hey, I would love to do videos, but I don't know what to do. Right. And our biggest thing is trying to create a process that we're doing ongoing content as well, because I mean, it's nice to have a sweet, sexy video, but there's a ton of value in ongoing stuff. I mean, from an SEO perspective, you have fresh creative. So, I mean, how do you help businesses come up with those ideas on the type of content that they can produce? Absolutely.
I think for one, that's like a creative muscle that people feel like maybe they should be really good at right away, but that I don't think that's realistic. I think that a lot of times, especially in like non-sexy industries, like the one example I always give is like a title loan agency. Like there's nothing sexy about that. Like 100-page contracts sitting on a desk, you know what I mean? But once you start trying to produce content and trying to do those behind the scenes things and helpful things for your client, like I think that ends up being able to open up your mind to the different possibilities of what you can shoot. And I think that has like its own momentum to it, if that makes sense. So we really wanted to be able to give small businesses the tools to be able to like shoot decent video and help educate them on how to do that, so that their videos are like good and like not distracting and like something that's watchable, so they can start like walking down the road of like, what are we going to talk about? And so that's one of the things that we did in one of our video content things, where we talked about like how to figure out what to talk about. And I think we gave like a list of different options of like, do behind the scenes, do an educational series, like talk about your day, show off your desk, like all those things that are like little things. But once you start doing that, I feel like it builds that creative muscle in people to be able to like realize that there actually is like a lot about your day that's interesting or cool, or like at least gives people a chance to like get to know you better, because people do business with people that they like. And so if they like you and say like, oh man, like I love my latte's foamy too, you know what I mean? Like, but how else are they going to know that unless you show them?
I totally agree. I mean, it's there's so much you can do. I mean, the relationship building, I think, is the big one with everything getting so digital. I mean, especially right now where people want to be more distant and everything, the more you can show who you are, your personality, it builds up that relationship, which that's what gets people over the fence to reach out and say, I want to work with you. So what are the biggest benefits of video? I mean, there's more businesses are realizing that, yeah, I should be doing video, but it's always, well, how do I use them? So, I mean, what are different ways that you've seen, I mean, whether it's email or social, I mean, why and how are businesses using, I mean, video?
I mean, I think there's a couple of like obvious ones, I suppose, that really anyone who did, can do a quick Google search and find out, which is like the fact that like the highest amount of engagement, meaning that people actually interacting with the content, happens with video. So for a business who's looking to make something, you would obviously want to make something that has the biggest return on your investment, even if that is not like financially directly, but like attention or views or likes or shares or something that the message of what you're doing is getting out there, I think is huge. So it's just one of the most effective mediums, assuming you did it well. Two, like I really do think people want to see videos as well. And so, which kind of ties in, but is also a little bit different too, whereas like people are really wanting to learn about a business. And so one of the most effective ways they can do that is by video, so to not be there would be kind of crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, and I think that, for like the example of like the title loan place, like even if they have a video series on like commonly asked questions is really huge and goes a long way to help. I mean, like buying a home is like a scary thing for people to do. And it's something that people don't do very often. You know what I mean? So even something where like you're giving something like a little helpful, FAQ or something like that, while it's not sexy and crazy, is like still super helpful and is totally going to build your business because you gain trust with someone. And so, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so they said like a video is worth 1,000,000, which I'm not sure if that's true. But as a creative person, it's so exciting to me to be able to have multiple ways to express myself, right? So you have like what you shoot, you have how you shoot it, you have how it looks when you edit it, you have what music you choose. All those things are expressing something. Yeah. And so I think it's exciting because like we talked about earlier with the subtleties, there's more subtleties you can have in that. And all those things, assuming you know who your customer is, build that like trust with someone. You know what I mean? Like if you have like a hipster brand, but then you have like country music, like that's not going to resonate well. You know what I mean? And so being able to have those things, but if you had like the indie acoustic music, they're going to hear that. And it's going to sound like what they listen to, and they're already going to feel more at home than if they just seen a picture. Yep. You know what I mean? Because it's like a part of who they are. So I think that's exciting too. I think that you can really tailor your content to really, really resonate with people really well with video.
What you just said, the picture's worth 1,000 words, video's worth 1,000,000. I mean, what I love about it is, I mean, how many times have you gotten a text and someone was super happy, but you read it differently where you thought they were mad? And you can't do that. You can't lose context through video because people can hear the emotion, people can see the facial expressions. And so I think that's where it's worth 1,000,000 words, because outside of just what you're actually saying, I think the emotion and all that and how you can make someone feel is just so much different. And I mean, now more than ever, people are wanting to connect, and you can connect with someone whenever they're looking at the camera, making eye contact, rather than just reading a blog about your services. Right. And I mean, I love the frequently asked questions because I think that's so powerful. One, it's easy content because they know what questions they are and what answers they give every single day. But then if you deploy that right and do some SEO optimizations, it's amazing how much Google is having videos rank on the search engine results page now. I mean, what got us doing more of that is like we started doing some of these podcasts and we started noticing you type in the guest name and our video would show up literally ahead of their website. And it was like, man, there's so much, Google is ranking video so much more now. So it's like, to your point, if you do frequently asked questions, you can give information and all of a sudden it builds that trust. Then, I mean, based off digital marketing, you can retarget people that saw that and then show the wow commercials and show that you're a good, legitimate brand and stuff like that. And I think there's just so many different ways that you can use video from both marketing to sales to education that all lead to business. I mean, another thing that I love that you said is like, even though it's not sexy to you, it might be to someone else. And I mean, most people can agree what you do isn't sexy to you, but from an outsider looking in, it's interesting to them. And something as simple as how to storyboard, just going through that process whenever, I mean, especially whenever you send like an estimate or whatever, if that's a line item, if you're like, whoa, that's a lot of money. But if you have a video and they've seen the whole process and the pre-production, what goes into it, they'll appreciate, one, the cost, and two, the end result, because they see the behind the scenes and know what goes into it.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're talking about with people kind of like getting to know you with the video, I think is so huge, because you're right. Like, how do you find out someone's like tone, how they sound, how, sympathetic or helpful they sound? Yeah. You know what I mean? You can't do that with text per se, or at least not as well. And so I think people wildly underestimate how much people shop online before they make a phone call. And to be able to have as especially, I mean, if you're actually a genuine person and you actually care, like, you'd be crazy not to like really put that out there for people to really connect to, because people are literally going to watch that video before they make a phone call. And I just don't think most people realize that. Like, people really do shop a lot. Yeah. I mean, like, you should see how many Amazon reviews I read before I buy a camera or a piece of gear. Like, I'm very curious about something before I go and actually purchase. Yeah. And so I don't think it's any different. And especially since you and I are in service businesses, like, where like they're going to be interacting with us a lot. Yeah. And so like who we are matters a lot. Like when I shot weddings, like I'm spending the whole day up in a bride's face, like all day long. If I'm like a tool bag, like that's going to be a long wedding for her. You know what I mean? And it's not going to be a good experience. And so being able to show off your personality, I think is super huge, because like I said, I just don't think people realize how many people are shopping ahead before they pull the trigger on something. And to be able to actually present yourself well, I think is huge.
I mean, that's what drives me crazy is so many brands are out there advertising like, buy from me, buy from this. And none of the creative is educational and telling people why to buy, when, I mean, everyone can agree. Yeah, I look at Amazon reviews all the time. I do so much research. It's like, man, if you just actually educated a bit more and use that as the creative for the ads, right, and then figured out how to, bring them down to the sales part, it's amazing how many more sales happen, what the return on investment looks like. I mean, it's amazing when you start folding in this educational, but people just feel like, well, I'm not saying buy and I'm not being, promotional. So I feel like people aren't going to buy from me. I mean, do you ever deal with that type of scenario where you're pushing for more education? They're like, well, how is that going to sell more product? You know what I mean?
Not with clients yet. But I know that's something I definitely struggle with myself. And thankfully we've begun exploring that a little bit with just even writing some of the blog content for the website, where it's like it's, people have to understand like content marketing isn't like really sales. You know what I mean? It's driving towards a sale, but it's not an ad. You know what I mean? It is supposed to be helpful. You know what I mean? And I think that, if there's anything that people can take away from like video stuff in general, is that like it's intended to be helpful to the end user. End of story. Yeah. Right. Like, and so if it's not helpful for them, like, just don't even bother making it. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so like, whilst, creating a video for an ad is like the most effective way to do it. And obviously that's helpful because they're buying your services and you're making your services because you think they're helpful. Like that whole lineup of content that happens before then is super huge to be able to like create that funnel where people can, build that trust. And eventually when they come time to having a buying decision, to be able to pick you. And yes, of course, like, I don't know. For me, I always look at it like a relationship. Like to me, like business and like human relationships are like almost completely identical. Like, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't ask to borrow your car to go drive somewhere because you don't know me. Like I could be a terrible driver. I could be a bad human and just steal your car. Like you don't know, you know what I mean? Because we don't have that rapport. Right. So there's like some things we can't ask of each other because we don't know each other that well. Someone I do know, I could go stay at their house overnight. You know what I mean? Like, because we have a different level of rapport. And so I think that when people look at business as being different than that, I think that's when they start running into trouble. And so like a business, you have a relationship with a customer. And so when you have that video content or any sort of content marketing that goes into it ahead of time, you're building that relationship with them so that when you do ask for something, there's something there. There's like something tangible, even if it's only up here. You know what I mean?
And I think it's hard. I mean, most businesses find it hard because it's a lot of thinking through. It's like, how can I produce content that's not selling, but get someone excited to then do that end result? I think a great example of that, I can't remember who brought it up, but they talk about there's a tire company. It was like back in the 30s or 40s or something like that, where it's like Firestone. They people weren't buying them fast enough. So they came out with a campaign where they would target people in this city, but talk about things to do like 30 miles away that then entice them to drive there. So now there's more wear and tear on the tires. So in turn, by doing that, people were driving more and it got people to buy more tires. And so it's like,
are you sure that's not Michelin stars?
I don't know what it was.
I think it is, because I literally listened to a podcast about like the other day that the Michelin star rating was like literally a wild idea that someone had, because they figured if they could tell someone this is a good restaurant and they drove there, that was more wear and tear on a tire.
Exactly. That is the entire premise of it. And so their whole messaging, their whole ideation, everything, there was nothing about buy new tires from us. It was get excited and do this, knowing your target audience, what they like to do, get them excited. Then they start driving more, they use the product, and now in turn, they end up buying quicker. And so like that's a genius way to content market, but to reverse engineer that, where it's like, all right, well, how are we gonna get them to use it? Well, in order for them to use it, they got to drive more. In order to get people to drive more, I mean, it's a lot of reverse engineering and thinking through, which, I mean, it's tough.
That's so cool you brought that up, because that podcast I was listening to, that was one. And then the other one was the Guinness Book of World Records, where like it's actually made by the beer company Guinness, because they wanted, I think the story was that they had gone out the people who started Guinness had gone out shooting, and someone shot it and they were like, oh, that's like the biggest goose ever. And they're like, no, it's not. And so they like wanted to go find out what the biggest goose was, right? That someone like shot or something. And so they decided like, okay, like this is like conversations and random butt questions that people ask themselves at a bar over a beer.
Yeah.
And if that beer could be Guinness, well, that'd be good for them. So like people don't really think of Michelin stars being Michelin, the tire company, or Guinness Book of Records being like Guinness, the beer company, but it totally fits. Like when you think about it, you're like, okay, that's actually like really smart. But you're right. It's like so like down the line that I think most people would actually just be too scared to do it, because it doesn't translate into dollars fast enough.
Exactly.
And I think that's actually like in a lot of ways what really kills people when they start doing marketing in general is like, I really do think most people look at it as like a quick fix or like a quick buck. And it's just not. Like video production, while it's great and wonderful and amazing, like is only one part of the whole marketing picture. SEO is only one part of the whole marketing picture. And when you put a ton of weight, like if you think that Facebook ads is like the greatest thing ever happened, you dump all your money into it. Like, I'm sorry, but like that's only going to do so well. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to make it do something that it was never really intended to do. Like it's only a part of the whole plan. You know what I mean? And it's so, to your point, it's like, people have to think long-term about some of these things. Like the money's eventually come. Like when you posted that picture of your SEO paying off, it didn't for a long time. You know what I mean? But now that it does, well, shoot, now that's worth it. So people don't necessarily think about a year ahead of time.
Exactly. But, and that's the short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. I always love that discussion, because it's like, no, I don't want to do that because I'm not going to see results tomorrow. But it's like, well, you'll start seeing 90 days and all of a sudden it's like compounding interest, and it's like a snowball effect, and it just keeps growing and growing, but you'll never get there unless you do it.
Well, if you make a helpful video that lives online forever, a great blog post that's actually helpful, that's like, evergreen content, that's going to live on forever. I mean, I'm sure you need to freshen things up every once in a while, but I mean, like, just go back to the example of the title loan company. Like, you're only going to have customers so many times. You don't really need to freshen up content that much. Unless like what you shot looks really dated, which is the video production problem. But you know what I mean? So like those things do last. Like if you write blog posts, yes, it sucks to pay for something that maybe doesn't work for 6 months, but then it will for like a long time. You know what I mean? It's worth it.
In so many conversations where out the gate, it's like, hey, we should be doing this SEO and this long-term stuff. It's like, no, it's going to take 6 months. We get 6 months down the road and it's like, hey, all these keywords that if we would have started here, we wouldn't be having to bid on them because our rankings would have come up. And it's just, it amazes me, the decisions that are made. It's just the long tail versus short tail. It's fun to watch those conversations and the thinking through it and kind of just how people approach that. I mean, it's amazing how different everyone is in that sense.
Well, yeah. And SEO is like another great example of like trying to do something it was never meant to do. Like when people, like if I'm not mistaken, organic search still wildly outranks paid search.
Oh yeah.
Like by a lot. Now, certainly there's nothing wrong with doing paid search, and it is super helpful, and there is definitely strategies with it. But like, you're right. Like having spent the time building up those keywords would have paid off way more than like trying to dump a bunch of money in to try to get like leads in 3 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You would have spent the same amount of money and did like some like actual written copy. You would be much further along.
Yep. And to your point, it's instead of dumping all your time and energy to producing blogs and doing SEO and not doing any paid, as opposed to doing it all, it's finding that healthy mix where it's like, hey, maybe we're on page 8 right now. Let's bid on those terms. but let's spend some time focusing on how we can improve those. Once they get to page 2 or 1, let's stop spending and find somewhere else. And it's an evolving strategy that never ends. And that's where it's like a lot of businesses are like, all right, well, how long is it going to take? It's like, well, it's how long is your business going to be around? I mean, you know what I mean?
Well, it's like you just said, like it's always changing. Like the strategy does never end.
Yeah.
Because there's always something new. Google's going to come out with a new algorithm and you're going to have to figure out how that works. You know what I mean? Like even like some of the stuff that I've been learning as I've been journeying through learning SEO is like going from like topical or keyword research to topical research and like how that completely changes the structure of a website even and the linkage inside of it to make sure you have like topical relevance. Relevance is completely different than SEO was like probably like 5 years ago. And so it's like, it's always changing. And I think that's probably like another reason why it's so good for a business to hire someone like us, because it's like, it is always changing. So like, yes, you could like take time, step away from your business and learn all this stuff, but it could totally change in like 2 years and you have to sit down and learn it all over again. But we're learning it all the time because we have to. So it's like,
and I mean, the people that do, I mean, hire agencies and stuff like that. I mean, they just have an understanding of opportunity cost. It's like, hey, I could learn it and you could, but then it's going to take from over here and then it's going to take you 2 years or a year. And it's understanding the value of your time and knowing that you could do it, but it's actually cheaper to bring someone else in because you're not taking ROI driving time away from something else. And so it's, again, just time management. That's also another fun thing to what it's people are like. Yeah. So, I mean, with everything going on with COVID, I mean, how a lot of businesses have been innovating. A lot of businesses have been doing quite a bit. I mean, how have you guys kind of fared through it? How are your clients kind of navigating? I mean, what is that just whole thing been like?
It's definitely been different. So we shot a client video, like a big landing page video probably a month ago. And for some people that was like way too soon. For them, they were fine with it. And on top of that, they actually had their business affected very little. At least that's what they told us. They had their business affected very little for COVID. So it's been interesting to see like what industries this affecting. And you know, we've had to do a couple one Zoom interview, which was fine. And I don't know. It was a great interview. I'm not bagging the interview. It was just not as fun. Like this is way more fun. Yeah. You know what I mean? Person. Yeah. And so, but you know, not everyone's comfortable with that. And so like I was mentioning before, like it's just been interesting as a business. You know, the first question is no longer, do you want to meet? It's like, or like, when do you want to meet? It's like, do you want to meet? Do you want to meet online? Do you want to meet in person? You know, do we want to shake hands? Like, I don't know. I'm just like, I was taught to shake hands. And so like, when I come in, I'm like, I'm going all in for it. I'm like ready to shake a hand. And then people like, you know, give you like an elbow. And I don't even know if there's really a physical difference on how sick one can get with an elbow as opposed to a hand. But it's just been interesting, you know what I mean, to like go through that transition. And like I said, there's really like a PR aspect to it anyways, because people are so emotionally charged right now that like, if you walk in and you try to shake someone's hand or like, you know, talk about something, like that could be the end of the sale. And so that's been really interesting and challenging. Cause that's like something like my wife's good at, not something that I'm really good at. So it's been cool, you know. That's been one of the good things about a marriage is that some of her EQ rubs on me. But it's been a challenge for sure. And just even to like bridging that balance between being helpful for small businesses that are coming up and still realizing that my time has worth and has value and what I'm doing has value. Because obviously I want to help people. You know what I mean? There's a lot of small businesses that are struggling and could use my help a lot. But that doesn't mean the value of what I do is any less. In fact, it almost makes it higher in value. So it's been interesting just to be able to like help out where we can. There's definitely some projects that we volunteered to help out with and some that we've decided not to, and kind of a case by case basis. So that's been kind of interesting as we go through this like kind of maybe not really post-COVID time to be able to just figure out that dynamic. It's just the dynamics have been interesting to deal with, I'd say. But a lot of people are really hurting, or a lot of people are really struggling, and other businesses are totally fine. So it's just been kind of figuring out where people sit with that. Yeah.
There's been some that have just literally accelerated and have blown up since all this has happened. I mean, you mentioned your wife kind of has rubbed off on you on some of the stuff with EQ. I mean, going from, this being a side thing to your full-time thing to going within a couple months, having, a team of 4. I mean, it takes a lot of time and thinking. How have you kind of balanced that work life? I mean, it's a lot of juggling, I know on my end, but I mean, how have you kind of, dealt with that as a new business owner?
I haven't had to make too many really crazy choices, which has been nice. That probably won't last forever, but thankfully I married someone who works very hard. And so I don't have to explain that I have a lot to do to her. Like she gets it. Yeah. In fact, it's likely that she's outworking me sometimes, you know what I mean? And so thankfully I don't really have to worry about that dynamic. But I think for me, just like anyone with any business really, is just being able to create boundaries for your time. And so Saturdays, I do nothing. If I cook a meal, that'll be really wild. No, not Saturday, Sunday, excuse me. Sundays is my rest day. And so, I really try to do nothing at all during those days. I like to try to have my day end at 5, if at all possible, unless I've forgotten to email someone or call someone or whatever else. It's nice to have those nice boundaries. And because I think one thing that I've realized, I'm sure you've realized too, is that there's time spent on things that are truly impactful for your business, and there's sometimes busy work you get caught up in doing. Yeah. And so I find out if I've made a really solid to-do list, and that to-do list is based on really solid things that build my business, then I can usually get that done by 4 just fine. And I can feel good about it. I got a lot of stuff done, and I try to cut out as much of that fluff as possible to be able to provide that protection time where my evenings are mine. Yeah. Because realistically, I could work all the time, but then I think my quality of work would drop too. And I'd end up doing a bunch of busy work, and that doesn't help anyone out.
Time management, it's huge. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned you've done, you've listened to or consumed a lot of educational stuff. I mean, what's been the biggest thing that you kind of learned, or what's the piece that kind of stood out the most that's helped you as you're growing your business?
I think there's 2 things been immediately helpful, especially in having a team, and it's another Gary Vaynerchuk thing. So hats off to him again. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he had mentioned kind of in passing, I think it was during one of the daily V's, was that everyone has a different motivation when they do their work. And so for some people that's financial, for some people it's freedom. That's mine. For me, my freedom is really important to me. Yeah. For some people it's what they work on. They really need what they do to matter a lot. So just treating everyone individually, I guess, you know what I mean? What a concept. But basically just being able to know that this throwing money at people isn't actually how you can make the people you work for happy. Some people really want that. You can throw money at me all you want. I'll be fine. You know what I mean? But other people, it's if they're not doing the work that they want to do, they won't be happy no matter how much money you throw at them. And so just really treating people on an individual basis that way. So that way, you keep your team motivated and you keep them happy. I want my team to be happy. I want them to feel good about the work that they do. And, kind of selfishly, I don't want to throw a bunch of money at people that I don't have to, if it's actually more beneficial for me to just make sure that they're on really cool projects. Yeah. You know what I mean? Why would I overspend if that's actually not going to make them happy? I want to pay them well, but if that's not what makes them happy, who cares? You know what I mean? I'm just wasting the money then. Yeah. Or I could spend it on cool trips or cool activities for the group. You know what I mean? That money could be used other places. So that's really been one thing that's really stuck out to me. I think the other thing too is kind of what I mentioned before with how I build my to-do list. One of the podcasts that I listened to was the MF CEO podcast with Andy Frisella. He owns First Farm, a couple other businesses. And his thing was just about and this is kind of tied in, I guess, to the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the things that you work on produce 80% of your results. Yeah. And so just really being honest with yourself and saying when I do my to-do list every day, it's okay, does this have a big impact on my business? How big? You know what I mean? Do I need to update my website, or do I need to make this phone call? Which one's going to have the biggest impact on my business? And then ordering my to-do list that way. So that way, if I have 5-6 items I need to knock off, they're actual real business changing things. Yeah. They're not just something to fill my time. Yeah. because there's always something good that can be done. And so you don't want to fill it with a bunch of random crap.
The biggest thing I'm working on is going from working in the business to working on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a huge goal for us. I mean, speaking of goals, we kind of wrap up. I mean, you're on an awesome trajectory. What does the next 3 to 6 months look like? What are you guys working on? And what are some of the goals that you guys have set that you're looking to accomplish?
For us, one of the things that we really set out to define ourselves with was a visual style on how we work. We definitely wanted to kind of go like the more edgy route, do like a little more like creative content, if you will. And so, I didn't want to be stuck like shooting doctor's offices for like the next 10 years, which would pay really well and probably pay better than all the other things I want to do, to be honest. But that's just not the work we wanted to do. And so we decided as a group that we would spend our downtime, non-client working time, building up a portfolio of work in the industries that we felt like would benefit from that kind of work. So when whether it was coffee shops or breweries or motorcyclists or auto shops and things of that nature, with like having like something kind of like edgy and wild and crazy that has a little rock music or like little black and white action, like stuff like that was something up our alley. And so we wanted to be intentional about getting ourselves in those industries, not only for that, but we wanted to be educated on those industries. And I had a conversation with a guy who owns a brewery here in Phoenix, and he was talking about how like people would be coming in trying to offer suggestions for him and just didn't really have any real concept of where he was at as a business owner. Like they were giving him like these fat proposals that were just like tens of thousands of dollars. And he's like, dude, I just started my business. Like I don't have $50,000 to spend on a marketing plan. Like where is this coming from? You know what I mean? And so one of the things he really loved about the video that we made for him was he's like, this talks about this place. Like this accurately describes and feels like something that would be from this place. And I think that's the biggest compliment. And the thing that we want to do is like, what is the best way we can serve a certain industry? Like understanding those pain points, understanding like what they struggle with, what they're good at, what they need help with, because I want to be able to do as good a job as possible. And so I don't want to go in there and just be like good at setting up a camera. I want to be good at like telling someone's story. And you can only really do that if you really understand the industry. And so we just want to be intentional. So the next couple of months for us is just building up the portfolio, building up that knowledge base of different industries so we can just do a really, really good job of serving them and being able to have like a body of work that really, people have a hard time like visualizing things abstractly. You know what I mean? Like I remember like when my wife and I went to go look at houses, like I would see a home and I could kind of see like, okay, if we move that wall or like did this or like change that tile, like for me, that's just how my brain works. My wife is actually probably more creative than I am, like as a human being, but like that was something I could do that she couldn't do, which is weird. So like for me, it's like you shoot a video, people want that video, but for them. You know what I mean? So we wanted to be able to have a portfolio of work where people could just look, a coffee shop could look at that video and be like, man, I love that coffee shop video. Can you do that for me? Rather than seeing like a video of like, a financial institution and like trying to figure out, well, how would that work for me? You know what I mean?
So building that portfolio.
Well, intentionally building a portfolio so that we can do the work that we want to do. And we certainly have taken up other work that has not been in that scope because we're happy to do it. We're happy to help people out. But we also have something we're aiming for too. Yeah. So building that structure and building that portfolio.
No, I love it. I mean, you're definitely intentional. I mean, you're doing great. I've been having fun watching the growth and can't wait to keep watching it. But here kind of at the end, if people want, any video help or want to get in contact with you, how would they be able to reach out to you at Burkhart Creative Agency?
So burkhartcreativeagency.com is our website. We do have a page dedicated towards small business owners who want to shoot video at home. We created it like right when the COVID shutdown happened, because we realized that there's going to be a lot of people stuck at home. They've got a camera in their pocket, and that camera is more than capable of shooting at least decent video for them to continue to promote their business. And so we went through and made like 11 videos, I want to say, that just outline anything from like brainstorming content ideas, how to shoot it, how to lighting, best audio, how to edit it, and how to post it and how to promote it online, just using the tools that people have in their pockets. So we're trying to help people out that had a small business that were shut down so they could still promote themselves so that at the end of the quarantine, right, they could actually be farther ahead than they were when they started. So that's where you can find out a lot of information about that. We've got a lot of blog articles on there. You can find us on Instagram at Burkhart Creative Agency. And we're not really on Twitter. So mostly Instagram is where I'm at. And LinkedIn, of course, or LinkedIn would be great too. Burkhart Creative Agency, or if you just add Steven Burkhart. I've got the red and blue headshot on there that you can barely tell it's me. But yeah, so and feel free, for anyone who's watching, just feel free to reach out. Definitely here to like ask questions and help out any way I can, to be able to just kind of help people get back on their feet.
At the end of the day, I know you're going to crush it because you care. You care not only about your employees, but about your client's success. And at the end of the day, that's the core of everything. You're there to build a relationship and help someone succeed rather than produce a video just so you can get paid. And so that's what is great.
Well, that's one of our main models is like, we want to become a partner with a business. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be, just something that happens once or twice and like whatever. Like, we want to partner with people. We want to become part of their process, to be able to help them out. Like, that is like the knowledge of a company is like your greatest asset and like doing great work for them. So we want to be partners with people. Well, really appreciate the time and look forward to connecting next time. Absolutely. There'll definitely be more of these. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it.